you can go ahead and begin.
All right. Well, hello everyone. Let's get started this morning. Thank you for joining our webcast today on the case study from American Family Insurance entitled "How to Build World-Class Employee Training with Service Virtualization." My name is Scott Edwards, and I work as a marketing director within CA's Application Delivery Business Unit. Now, joining me today in this webcast, and frankly the reason you all are here, is Jeff DeMeyer, a software engineer at American Family Insurance. Jeff has been at American Family Insurance for a little over 15 years, has worked in various roles around managing testing efforts, automated testing, software and computing, as a software and computing technician, and as a security analyst. Jeff also served for 4 years in the United States Air Force, which is very impressive. And for the past 2 years, Jeff has been in charge with leading the way to find new approaches for utilizing service virtualization in their environment to create efficiencies and build innovation. And we're thrilled to hear Jeff present today on one of the specific use cases that they are utilizing, and that is service virtualization as a training tool for their employees. Now, Jeff had worked on this, or presented this webcast at CA World in November, and it was such a popular event. We got a lot of requests for it, and so we decided to bring him back in this community and to hear him give that webcast or that presentation again. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. This presentation is being recorded, and we will make it available for distribution afterwards. And undoubtedly, many of you will have many questions for Jeff as we go into this, and we'll save plenty of time at the end so that you can ask him your questions. So with that, let's go into the agenda, and I got kicked out of the WebEx, but that's okay. We'll go into it. So we know that there are a few of you who either are on the call now or will be listening to the recording who may not have a full understanding of what service virtualization is. And so we want to make sure we kind of go through what it is before Jeff goes into explaining his specific use case. And so then he'll go into the I would say it's a pretty unique innovation of how they're using service virtualization, how a request was brought to their team, and how they needed to figure out a way to help train their new customer service reps, these employees coming on, and giving them an environment that would help them get up to speed so they could do their jobs much more quickly and better, and what they needed to put in place to make that happen. So we'll go to that, and Jeff can kind of explain that process. So let's first just kick it off as far as what service virtualization is. And you've all heard this term of we're in the application economy. And the way I look at it, frankly, is what that means is organizations, they have to deliver applications to market faster than they've ever been able to do before. And it's just not a matter of speed, because you can do everything you can in your power to deliver an application to market fast. But if that application fails to deliver to whoever that business user is or the customer is, then all your effort that you put into delivering fast has been flushed down the toilet. It doesn't matter. So you have to deliver a fantastic user experience. But the issue is that there's some of these constraints as you're going through trying to build this application, have it go through the software delivery lifecycle. In a recent survey, it was interesting to see that over 80% of teams experience delays due to issues around unavailable systems and dependencies. And you can say, yeah, well, that might happen every once in a while, but what's interesting is that's happening over half of the time when these critical dependencies are absolutely needed right when they need them, and they can't have, the developers or testers can't have access to them. And you also see here that 79% of teams face these cost restrictions, whether it's restrictions of some third-party system or API, or the access fees as they ping those during the development and testing scenarios. There's all these different constraints that we face today. So how are they dealt with? Well, a couple of different ways. People will build simplistic stubs and mocks. That's developers can put those up and build those up quickly, and they're made to be fast to get up quickly. But they're not meant to be robust. I mean, that's just the way they are. They're very fragile. They're often very rudimentary, and they don't stay in sync with the environment you're trying to replicate. Developers also have to just wait, as we showed before. They just sit there and wait till something that they can do falls into their lap from the team that they were waiting upon, or waiting for the system the constraints to be out of the way. So they have to wait. Otherwise, they're wasting money. They might be pinging a certain API, and they have to test against it. In order to do that, they need to pay money for every time. Might be a nickel, but that sure adds up over time. And so you can do this today, but the challenge is it's not working. And in the application economy, where more and more new innovations are coming to market every day, you have to innovate, or frankly, the competitors will eat you up and you'll die. And so that's the challenge that organizations face, and that's where service virtualization comes in. We look at this as a way to help organizations ignite innovation, to bring ideas to market much, much faster. You can look at it as in a sense, the catalyst of DevOps or of a digital transformation that an organization might be going through. And there are three key things that we look at service virtualization and say, this is what service virtualization can enable you to do: to accelerate the application delivery, to instill this idea of a pervasive quality throughout the software delivery lifecycle, and then to drive efficiency through the development and testing process. So we talked about these constraints, and what I wanted to show is, often there are these bottlenecks, and you can kind of see this image in the background that we hear oftentimes developers and testers, in a sense, feel this way. They're on this freeway, they need to get somewhere fast, but they can't. They're stuck. There's these constraints, whether they're system, data, or cost constraints, or even being able to have development teams work in parallel instead of waiting on the other teams before they can start their work effort. As one of our customers had said, I can't do anything until I have everything, and I never have everything. So what am I supposed to do? Well, this is where service virtualization comes in. And typically you see this as kind of a build slide, and I'll just kind of walk you through it. But you'd have an order management system, and it needs to call the mainframe, right? Or it needs to call the system of record, or perhaps an SAP or ERP type system, or APIs, but it can't because there are certain constraints. It might be that you can't access the mainframe until a Saturday or a weekend or what have you. And so what happens is we install service virtualization, and it basically listens to the transactions, the transaction flow, the interaction that happens with the request and the response. And then it virtualizes that system so that your developers and testers can have unrestricted access to that virtual environment, and you can replicate as many times as you want. And what that enables is this speed, this flow of work that you've never ever had before, to eliminate those constraints that are typically in this environment. So when we talk about accelerate application delivery, service virtualization can simulate the needed systems end to end, be able to create these virtual services extremely easily, and enable teams to develop in parallel. And you can see this shot at the top, where you have the sequential versus a parallel development environment. And instead of waiting for one dev team before the other dev team can get started working, now you can develop in parallel. And if that's the case, the applications can get to market much, much faster. Same here with this pervasive quality idea. When we talk about shift testing left or shift left testing, instead of waiting until a certain point of time, perhaps in the user acceptance testing scenario, where the developers just throw the code over to the testing department, you shift that left, and now with better access and access into actually what production systems might look like, you can do your testing earlier, you can do it more frequently, and do it against systems that are more realistic in nature. And that can help reduce the quality issue. I know one of our customers recently talked about how where they were usually finding about 40% of their quality issues or bugs in the last step before it goes into production. They were able to reduce it from about 40% to mostly zero by instilling service virtualization. And then the last thought I want to show here before I turn it over to Jeff is the ability to drive development efficiency. This new research that many of you may have seen, that came out from Voc Research just a couple weeks ago about the massive efficiencies that service virtualization can drive. If you look here at the cost benefits that organizations mentioned, 65% said that the benefit from a cost standpoint to them is this unrestricted access to those services and those components that they need. 44% talked about the OpEx reduction, and 35% talked about the reduced costs associated with those access to those APIs, those third-party fees. And you just look at the wait time, very, very impressive. So before implementing service virtualization, and this survey was done over 500 companies across the world, and on average they were waiting 32 days for the required systems to do the development testing. After installing and utilizing service virtualization, that drops down to 1. So when you talk about massive efficiencies, when you talk about quality, when you talk about accelerating the delivery of the applications, service virtualization does just that. And again, it's a way to kind of ignite that innovation. Now, what is fascinating to me is to listen and hear this case study that Jeff has put in place for American Family Insurance. It's fantastic. It's a great way to think about using service virtualization. There are many use cases and ways to use it, but this is a great one. We want Jeff to share it. And so, Jeff, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Scott, for the introduction, a very kind introduction. I hope I can live up to the introduction with my presentation. So, as Scott mentioned, I'm Jeff DeMeyer. I work at American Family Insurance. I'm a software engineer. And the case study that I'll be presenting for you today has to do with a situation that came up where we needed to create training environments in a very short amount of time without any history of training environments with the new applications that we were creating. So I'll take you through our entire process on how we ended up getting to the point where we are today. So to start with, I've got a statement here about the importance of training environments. When we have new systems that we put in place, we think about development, we think about testing. Sometimes we don't really think about training and the importance of training, because even with great development and great testing, if the people we're producing the product for are not well versed and trained in its use, then it's pretty much doomed to failure. So in our situation, we had our training department come to us and say, hey, we've got to do training for these new systems that we're creating, and we don't have a training environment. Historically, we've had legacy training environments that, were 25, 30 years old, so there was tons of data available. There was, it was pretty much a playground. The agents that sell our insurance could go out and play and do whatever they wanted to. But with limited time and not all that history, we weren't going to be able to provide that in new training environments. But training, of course, comes to us and says they want a real training environment, and it needs to be isolated because they don't want other things within our development and testing systems to impact the training environment. And the entire thing has to be ready in 3 months. Our response immediately was, the real training environment costs too much. There's a lot of support costs and support constraints. It's all going to be very expensive. And with all of our developers wrapped up 100% into developing the new products that we were going to be delivering to our agents, there weren't the resources to put a training environment in place. The quickest we could do it was 12 months. So the architecture of what they wanted with a real training environment would have consisted of the web application, the database behind that web application, 9 web services, and all the databases and mainframes that feed data into those web services. A lot of hardware, a lot of support, virtual servers, real servers, databases, mainframes. We would have to have support people for all of those back-end pieces for the training environment to be available at any time, because we couldn't afford to have training go down during training classes. After the initial kickoff meeting, we went back, the client went back and tried to lower their expectations when we told them, it's going to take 12 months and we couldn't do a number of the things that they were asking for. And we went back and thought about CA Service Virtualization. Since we already had the product, we started to look at it and say, you know, what can we do with this product in a training environment type capacity to see if we can, you know, meet the client halfway or change some of our no's into yeses and say, yes, we can do this for you. We had a proposal meeting where we went back to them, and after looking at CA Service Virtualization, we said we can provide you a real-like environment. Real-like in tick mark says it wouldn't be real, but it would feel real to the users. The client was skeptical. We told them it would be isolated, and nobody else would be using that environment except for people for training. Everything would be dedicated to it for training purposes only. Again, the client was happy to hear that, but they were skeptical. And then when we told them we could have it ready in 3 months, they said, hey, you know, that's better than nothing, but we're still skeptical. They wanted the playground that they've had for 25 years. We were telling them it wasn't available, but we could give them something pretty darn close and at least give them something that would be adequate to train our agents so that when they get the new product and are sitting in front of our customers, it looks like they actually know, you know, how to use the application that they're using. So our proposal consisted of, you know, the web application and the database would still remain, but we would have a load balancer over 2 virtual service environments, each of them running 9 virtual services. So it's really a total of 9 virtual services, but for stability purposes, we put it behind a load balancer so that if one of our virtual service environments needed to be taken offline for maintenance or having some sort of issue, we could always switch the load balancer to go to just one of them. So that increased the stability of the proposed solution as well. After the meeting results, the client accepted our proposal under the condition that they would only use it for this first training session. They still wanted a real environment for future training sessions, but they were willing to give this a try. They also added one more requirement. They wanted us to provide a solution in which IDs assigned to training environment users would be taken care of automatically. Currently, the way they were doing it was they would have a list of thousands of training IDs spread across 10 to 12 different educators, and those educators would have to cross off the names, you know, on the training ID list in Excel, basically remove it or say it's used, and then sync them up every day together so that they made sure they weren't reusing IDs. They didn't want to do that anymore, and they wanted us to provide a solution for it. We saw it as an opportunity to see what we could do with service virtualization because we had it was fairly new in-house, and we were looking for ways in which we could implement it. So we moved forward with plans to build the environment, and we were looking forward to the client's feedback when we were done. So the journey, we start down the path of discovery, if you want to call it that. So to establish the building blocks, I ended up building a virtual service model that has 3 different modes of operation: pass-through, capture, and virtual. The pass-through mode would pass call through the virtual service to a live service and then return the response from the live service. The capture would do the same thing, but it would capture the request and response from the originating application, web application, and store them in an external location. And the virtual mode would just pass calls directly to the virtual service image, the canned responses, and return one that matched the criteria. Operation modes and live service endpoints were all driven via a properties value that was located in an external file. So we externalized the modes of operation outside of the virtual service model. We then deployed a web application to the VM with all web service endpoints. So our web application for training had all of its web service endpoints pointing to this model, you know, this virtual service model that I created. And then the client provided us with 12 training scenarios, and we began to start capturing those 12 scenarios with the virtual service models. So then the training environment had to be loaded up, you know, for producer IDs and things like that. We had a data load team that loaded it up so that we would have that kind of stuff available for our 12 scenarios. All 9 virtual web services were set up in capture mode, and then had the live service endpoints pointing to our QA environment. So we did have live systems that we could point to. In this case, that worked out very well for us. I mean, you're hoping by the time you get to training that the services behind the application exist already. All 12 scenarios were manually exercised. We went through them step by step, you know, go in, create a customer, add a customer, create a quote, all these different types of scenarios that we want our agents to be able to do. And then we took the captured XML request response pairs and we used the recording feature of CA Service Virtualization that says you can record a virtual service image using a location of request response pairs. We pointed that recording to each individual service's captured pairs and created a virtual service image for each one of the models. Once the service images was created for each one of the models, we switched it over to virtual mode and went through and tested all the scenarios again to make sure that they could be essentially played back, and they worked. For the automated ID assignment, we actually used service virtualization for this solution as well. Instead of using XML request response pairs in a virtual service image, we used HTML, and we created a GUI per se that people can open up in a web browser. It gets its HTML web page from the virtual service model. The image sends it back, allows them to put in what class that they're taking and what environment they're in, and then it generates, goes against the database behind it to find the next available test ID, generates an email to the person telling them what their test ID is, as well as including on the email the instructors and the people who support the virtual service environment. So we all know when somebody is getting an ID assigned to them. Right, so first real use, how did it go? We went to the client and we said, okay, so you wanted a real training environment, and we delivered a real-like training environment. It was isolated. The training environment was isolated from all other tiers. We weren't pointing through to int or dev or QA for any of our back-end services. Everything was solely isolated and dedicated to the training environment. And it had to be ready in 3 months. We actually delivered it on time soon enough so that the trainers could even do a walkthrough, and the total estimated hours that we put together for creating the environment were less than what we planned. So here's a sample of the GUI automated test ID assignment. As you see from the URL at the top, it is going to a virtual service environment, Lisa VSE, and returning this, this GUI page. And then they select what class they want. You know, I put my name in there, and then you click the Get Logon information, and it returns a screen that looks like this. It says, here's your training ID environment, here's your password, and then it also sends an email that looks like this to all the people involved in the training environment, as well as the trainers and the student. So there's a copy of it out there as well. We also set up a situation in which, you know, we have so many IDs in the database. When we get to a certain row in the database, it shoots an email off to the person who supports this particular web service, virtual service, and tells them the database needs to be reset and the training environment needs to be reloaded. So it helps us be proactive. So feedback. It was a great way to, the agent said it was a great way to learn their way around the new application. The trainers loved the automated ID assignment. They could throw out their Excel spreadsheets and haven't had to use them since. They love the ability and stability of the training environment. In the 2+ years that we've been using it, outage time has been only pretty much related to things that were not caused by the virtual service environment. They were caused by other things within the actual web application server itself. One of the trainers felt the navigation was too tight. They said, hey, you know, this is great, but, you know, it's like an exercise in keyboarding was their term. Because, you know, that you had to follow a scenario, and in the past they were used to having this wide open playground. However, I kind of reminded this trainer that navigating through this application and doing a quote or an app would be no different in a training environment than if I were to drive by my agent's office and drop off a piece of paper with a bunch of information on it and say, hey, you know, give me a call once you have a quote on this. There is a bit of keyboarding to that as well. We want to make sure they could get through the application, click the right buttons, make the right choices, because we want to give our customers an accurate quote instead of an inaccurate quote, which in a sense is an exercise in keyboarding, but it's still part of the training experience. And we actually loosen things up a little bit too to make the virtual services more flexible. So if the agents didn't put in the exact information in the scenario, with the meta response, in a lot of cases they still got something acceptable back. Of course, if they go way too outside the lines, you know, they're going to get an error because the application itself is not going to accept the response that we send to it. The client decided that based on the cost, reliability, and usability of the environment, that they were ready to have future training environments created with it. They actually were quite impressed, and they loved it, the fact that we were able to provide it in the time that we did. So we moved on and started using it more. So now we have 50 virtual web services in 3 virtual training environments. We eliminated the use, when you think about that from a cost perspective, we eliminated the use of all the JVMs, databases, and mainframes behind all 50 of those web services. None of that is needed anymore. We eliminated the estimated maintenance hours to support the training environments. Those estimated hours that would be needed to support those JVMs, databases, and mainframes are no longer valid, and we don't need to put those into the cost of the training environment. We've had 0 outages in 2.5 years with the virtual system that were caused by the system. We did run out of our database crashed behind it once, but that's the only outage in 2.5 years, and it was on a Saturday. So 4,000 agents, at the time I did this presentation at CA World last November, 4,000 agent CSRs had been adequately trained using the virtualized training environments. The training environments would not have been available without this technology. There just wasn't time to do anything else. So it was either this or nothing, and this actually worked better than what we could have put in place in 12 months. The training ID assignment allows the people to check out IDs before training sessions. So the educators, they send some stuff ahead of time to the people that are going to be in training, and they say, go check out this ID and go onto this training environment and do some pre-work before the actual training session, which allows their training sessions to be more impactful and beneficial to the attendees. And we now have more developers using CA Service Virtualization. And that is in addition to where I was at when I did this presentation. So we have some time, so I'm going to quickly, before we go to Q&A, I'm going to share my screen. I have to ask Mary. Mary, can you make me the presenter?
Jeff, you are. So you should be able to share your desktop. Yes.
Okay, share. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to monitor 2. Okay, so here's the virtual service model. It was a picture when you came into the presentation today. I'll just go through it real quickly. I did upload this out to the invite on the community section of the CA webpage. And basically this model is what we've created for all of our training models, and as well as what the developers are now using. So it's just a listen, and then this properties file is the external file I was talking about. It says where this file is located. So currently it's in the project root, but the way we use it is we actually put it out in an external path. So when this model executes, it goes out to the path, and it looks at a couple different things. I can show you, well, I've got the data in here, so we'll look at the properties text from here. So all that's in this properties file is a mode and an endpoint. In this case, mode is virtual, but as I mentioned in the presentation, I have pass-through and capture as well. So the model goes out and looks at what the mode is. What mode am I in? Logs the request. On this prepare request step, it checks for execution mode to see if it's in virtual. If it's in virtual mode, it skips everything else in this model and goes right to the canned responses here, logs the result of it for my own metrics. We don't really need that anymore because I have all this hooked up to Splunk, but at the time this is what we went with. Prepares the response and sends it back. If it's not in virtual mode, we'll see on, is this the step here? Right here. On this log request step, we take the value of the Lisa VSCHTV current transaction value and we assign it to this FLTXN, which is full transaction. It's essentially the XML request. That's all it is. So we peel it out of there, we go through the virtual service router, and we send it to the live service. In the live service step, we have that raw XML request, essentially, and then the endpoint from the properties file saying, what live endpoint do I want to send this call to? So that can also be changed at the external properties file at any time. Just change it, hit the save button, now this live service is going somewhere else. Then we check for the mode. If it's in capture mode, then we go down here to the capture RR pair step in which we save the request, live service request RSP, and the response, which is just the live service RSP, to an XML that is named the name of the service with this counter value that gets made in this calls made step right here, so that in our XML pairs folder we end up with request and response pair that are numbered so that we know which ones go with which ones. We know which request goes with which response. So if you're in the capture mode and you get all these XML request response pairs, then you would have a folder full of XML request response pairs. You would just go into images, create new service image from request response pairs, and point it at that folder. You go through the basic steps of creating the image. And now you have captured and created an image of actual live service capture. Then you build your image, you drop it in your virtual response selection, or maybe you merge it with an existing service, change your mode to virtual out on your external properties, and then you're now using the stuff you just captured. So it makes it really quick to build these things up and have them work quite quickly. Of course, you've got to set your operation comparisons, comparator operators, equals, greater than, anything on all the tabs. Like in this case, you still have to go through and set your comparison operators. But you don't have to think about what is the correct XML request response pair. This model actually automates that process for you. From the perspective of how our developers are now using it, and there's another benefit here that has been realized by my organization, is this is how the developers are using the TDM data store, which is the technology that CA presented us with that allows you to use a spreadsheet as a database. Their calls go in here and they look at what tier the application they're running this web service against is in and what environment, and then they can choose a drop-down. They can choose virtual pass-through or capture and change any of these to any of the endpoints they want to be the live pass-through endpoint for capturing or creating virtual services. Once they capture it, they create virtual services and they're using it for their unit testing. The benefit of this and the advantage of this is that when you have 20, 30 web services behind a web application, that the live services react, have an average response time of 1 to 2 seconds, and you're running over 4,000 unit tests, and then you replace those with virtual services that respond in half a second or less, you shave hours of time between each of your continuous integration cycles. I've had them tell me that they've gone from 5 to 6 hours to an hour for each one of their continuous integration set of tests, because they can get through all of them so much quicker because the response time from the virtual services is so much faster. So that allows us to have that many more continuous integration cycles per release. It allows us to find more defects, allows more versions of the application to be uploaded or deployed, deploy, fix, deploy, fix, deploy, fix, and it creates a much faster environment for that. So with all of that said, that pretty much ends my part of the presentation. I will go back to the screen and we'll go to the Q&A.
All right, thank you, Jeff, for going through that. It's really fascinating to see what was done. And let's open it up for questions. Again, you can come off of mute by hitting pound or #6. If you want to ask a question over the phone, or feel free to type it in the chat room in the virtual classroom. So anyone have any questions?
There's a question in the Q&A panel right now from Alan Baptista. The question is, Jeff, what kind of uptime do you offer for this training system? Is it something your organization measures?
Yeah, I was just responding to that, but it doesn't let me hit send apparently. But by uptime, if you're talking about how often this system needs to be available, our training environment is expected to be up 24/7, 365. So they don't ever want to be any downtime, which is one of the reasons we put it behind the load balancer, because that gives us time to do maintenance, upgrade, patching, or whatever, checking out stuff on one of the VSE servers without impacting the environment from being down.
Great, thank you.
Hi, this is Manish.
Go ahead.
Hi, Jeff. This is Manish Shah. Thank you for the presentation. I had one question related to that feedback slide that you had around where the feedback was the app, the navigation was a little tight, and the suggestion was made around using magic strings and dates. Was there any requirement, or have you implemented any like stateful virtual services for this, where people need to kind of see changes across days or even across different users that are using these services?
Not at this time. That was something they talked about at the time. The challenge in our particular training environment is a lot of these times, like you're talking about. I can see the situation, like if you're doing a billing environment and you want to go through an entire billing cycle, you would need to go through a series of days for renewals and all the other kind of stuff that goes on with billing. The information that holds a lot of that and reacts a lot with that is the actual databases behind our web applications, which, you know, depending on whether they're proprietary or the vendor of your training environment allows you to, you can virtualize those databases as well. However, we did not go down that path.
Okay. Okay, sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just a reminder, if you've got any other questions, you can press the #6 or *6 to unmute your line, or use the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen.
So Jeff, I'll ask a question to you. So I'm curious, you know, you respond to the client that basically it's going to take 12 months before you can get something like this up and running for them. And I'm sure their response is like, no, it's got to be much quicker. I mean, tell us a little bit more about what the reaction was when you came back with this feedback.
Well, yeah, the answer was no when we first mentioned that it was going to be 12 months, considering that the application was rolling out in 8 to 9 months. So with our first proposal, the new application would be in the hands of the agents without them ever having seen it. So that was not where we wanted to be. So at the time that we had the first meeting and we were looking at 12 months, and I think we were being pretty generous even with that, and they were talking about how, well, their first training sessions were scheduled for 6 months out, maybe even 5 months out. We both left that meeting, both the client and IT, kind of scratching our heads. We're like, we've got to find a solution. There is no option to just say no at this time, but we weren't sure what the solution was. So we just started looking around and thinking about stuff, and we had done a little bit with service virtualization at that time. And I was in those meetings and was presenting to my boss. I'm like, well, let's see if we can, let's just load up a local version of the application that needs to be trained and throw some of this stuff behind it, a couple virtual services, and see if we can get it to react like we want. And we were able to, so we took that proof of concept, the 1 or 2 little services that we put behind a local build of the application, and went forward to the client with that new knowledge of saying, I think we can do it this way.
I'm sure, yeah, it sounds like the feedback is, okay, we'll see if this works out. And then after you implemented it, obviously they loved it, as you show here in the slide. And just real quick, so I mean, you mentioned obviously the huge time savings to get this up and running and building an environment that they like and they want and they use. Any idea? I mean, you mentioned like the not having the need for JVMs or the web servers, but any idea of what the infrastructure costs would have been had you gone the 12-month route?
I don't have any figures or numbers, but I could just sum it up as lots.
Lots, yeah.
Yes, it would be a lot more than what the current solution is costing us. The current solution is being supported by one person, and we do have other people for the actual web application and the database behind the web application, but you're talking about one person supporting virtual services that take the place of, like you said, 50 web services times all the JVMs, mainframes, and databases that would be up behind those.
Awesome. Stefana or Mary, any closing thoughts before we close out this webcast?
We do have some more questions in chat. So yep. If you could open up the chat panel.
Yes, I see it.
Jeff?
Yes. So we're talking about the one from John Alexander. Says, can you comment on application upgrades and how you kept the VSEs current? the application would upgrade, and as they would do it, because we have this model where we can just switch it from captured or virtual mode, the first thing we would do when the new application was put up there, and in their situation they also had 2 environments of the application load balanced essentially. So when new upgrades would come, they would put it on one. That way we wouldn't impact the training environment, and then we would start running tests, going through the scenarios, because they would give us new scenarios as well as time went on. And if they worked, then we didn't make any changes. But if they didn't work, we would just go into the service that failed, open it up into capture, do the same new scenario, capture the new XML request response pair, and compare it to what we were currently offering. And make changes either by changing the XML response that we had, or just replacing the XML request response that we had that is no longer working. We would replace it with the new one that we captured. So it was very quick and easy to upgrade these when things did change. Does that answer John's question? Yes. All right. Excellent.
Okay. So I think we've answered all the questions. We're going to put up a quick poll. If everybody could take a moment to rate the value of this Webcast.
While we're doing the poll, Alan asked one last question, Jeff, and I think it was around surrounding the future of your training environments and what you plan to do to expand this in the future.
Currently, we are only on the training environments that we're at. We're like, we've got the 50 web services behind there. I know because of the time it takes to load the database up, and we never went into the virtualized database, but the training people have been looking, possibly moving on to more of a macro type environment, which I find rather interesting considering that their early complaints about this environment was they were worried it wasn't going to be flexible enough. But what they're looking at is possibly some simulator thing, which is going to limit their ability compared to what we've created for them. So the future looks like they're going to go with something else down the road, but my belief is when they go with whatever else they're looking at, they're going to probably come back to this because this gives them so much more than what that is going to give them. It's just they're not happy about the amount of time it takes to load up the database in the web application. It's like, well, guess we can't have everything.
Well, maybe we can.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So Mary and Scott, any other questions that you see, or should we close out the call now? Scott?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any. I don't see any questions in here either. So we'll go ahead and close the call again. Please make sure you fill out the poll question here. We appreciate everyone coming, and we look forward to many more webcasts here in the community talking about some of the use cases many of you have done. So yeah, and if you feel like you have a story you'd love to tell the community, let us know. We'll get you on here as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Jeff. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye-bye.